Good morning, everybody. Today is Monday, August the 24th, and today I'll be going over Unit 1, Lesson 1. And the title for that one is Building a Math Community Through Real Data. Our I can statement for today: I can represent and interpret data using whole numbers. And the standard associated with that is NC4 MD4. Our essential question for today: how is data useful in real-world situations? So after today's lesson, you should be able to have some answers to that question. How is data useful in real-world situations? We're going to start out with the problem of the day. And our problem of the day is, I want you to brainstorm a list of all the ways you practice math over the summer. Brainstorm a list of all the ways you practice math over the summer. Now that word brainstorm means for you to think about, to revisit mentally, and just kind of think about some of the things you did. And you're going to make a list of all those ways you practice math over the summer. So we're going to pause for a couple minutes, and I want you to, if you're watching a recording of this, just type the answers into your math notebook. And for those of you watching it live, we're going to go on and type it into the chat bar. Now, what is a possible example of how you could have practiced math over the summer? If you use Dreambox at all over the summer to work on your math skills, that's practicing math. If you work with your parents or your siblings to practice multiplication facts, that's another example of practicing math over the summer. So what will you be able to do after today's lesson? Let's look at your learning target. You'll be able to interpret a bar graph and create and answer questions about the data represented in the graph. And the graph represented right here is an actual bar graph. We'll take a closer look at some like this here shortly. So let's look at this particular bar graph on the left. And I've got a couple of questions here related to the graph that we're going to think about. The first one is, what do you notice about this graph? And the second question, what do you wonder about this graph? And you should be able to look at it, study a little bit before you answer the questions. And we're going to take just a few minutes right here, and I want each of you to answer these questions. What do you notice about this graph? What do you wonder about this graph? Now, for those of you watching this live, I'm going to want you to go in and type it into the chat box. Type it into the chat box. And for those of you who watch and record it, I want you to write your answers down in your math notebook. And we're going to pause for just a few minutes and give you an opportunity to do that. Now, for both of these questions, there could have been many answers for them. One possible answer for what do you notice about this graph? If you notice that if you look at team 1 on the dark blue right here is period 2, it looks like they score more points than any other team and more points during this period than any other period. That's one of the things that you possibly could have noticed about it. So what do you wonder? What do you wonder about it? You could have possibly be wondering, well, are there only 2 periods, or are we missing a 3rd period and a 4th period? And what are these numbers at the bottom mean? You could be wondering that. What do these numbers at the bottom mean? You got 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. What do they mean? Our next slide here, we've got question at the top. What are some expectations for class discussions? What are some expectations for class discussions? So we're going to pause just a couple minutes And I want you to be thinking about what are some of the expectations that you want to have for us to do our discussions for online learning. And we're going to pause, and I want everybody to think about that. If you are watching this recording, what I want you to do is type the answers into your notebook. And those of you that are live, watching this live, you can go in and type it into the chat box. Okay, so for our top question here, what are some expectations for class discussions? Some of the things that could possibly be considered for expectations in order to help create a really, really good learning environment for all students is you coming prepared for each class. Now, what do I mean by coming prepared? That means that you've got your all of your material and supplies with you before you start our live lessons. And those materials could include your EL workbook, your math binder, your notebooks, your pencils. Okay, it could include any of that. And if you've been assigned to read something prior to our lesson, making sure that you've already read it, that means that you are prepared for the day. Another possible answer could be keeping your microphone on until it's time for your turn to speak. So keeping your microphone muted until it's time for you to speak. Another possible answer, following instructions, listening to others, and I also want you to ask questions to clarify. So if you got a question about something that you don't understand, I do want you to be able to ask that. Now, each individual teacher may have a different method of having you ask those questions. It could be typing into the chat box. It could be raising your hand. Our next section here, when we create graphs, there are two types of data. You've got categorical data, categorical graph, and data in those particular graphs, they categorize as things like food, clothes, and hobbies. An example would be flavors of ice cream. Flavors of ice cream. And also you got numerical. And for numerical, it has a number associated with it, such as a number of pets. So a key thing to remember here is numerical generally is going to have a number associated with it. So how does someone collect data? How does someone collect data? Data could be something as simple as a student in the class asking their classmates just a simple question. What type of ice cream do you like? Or what flavor of ice cream do you like? That one simple question. And writing down the answers could be how someone collects data. So now we're going to discuss the bar graph on our next slide here. And we're going to take just a few minutes. And what I want you guys to do first is just to look at the actual graph and try to get an understanding of it first by reviewing everything that's on the actual graph. So we're going to pause for a minute, and I want you to really take a look at it, read what's up there, look at the numbers, and try to get an understanding first. Okay, after having an opportunity to really look over the graph and try to study it, we'll look at it together. At the top it says, types of pets our grade level has. So this is the actual title of it. Types of pets our grade level has. And if you look over here to the left side, you've got written number of pets. This is number of pets. And you got a lot of numbers over here. 0, 3, 6, 9, and it goes all the way up to 39. So you go over here to the actual bars, you got cats, and you got next to that fish, and you got dogs. And these represent the types of pets. These all represent the types of pets. Okay, so I'm going to move on down to question number 1 first. Which animal was most popular and how do you know? Which animal was most popular and how do you know? So I want you guys to, we're going to pause for a couple minutes and try to find the answer to that. We're going to pause for a couple minutes and I want you to try to find the answer to that. And For those watching live, I want you to type the answer into the chat box. And for those of you who are watching the recorded version of this, I want you to write the answers into your notebook. Okay, so you've had an opportunity to share your answer to number 1. So we're going to revisit it. Which animal was most popular? How do you know? So if you go over here, you look at the types of animals, cats, and you go all the way up on this particular bar. You see it's at 24. You go to fish, it goes up to about 9, and dogs goes all the way up past 30. So what that means is dogs are represented by the highest number of pets because the bar graph is higher. The bar graph is higher here. That's how you know that dogs are the most popular. Number 2, what type of data is represented in this graph, categorical or numerical? How do you know? What type of data is represented in this graph, categorical or numerical? How do you know? So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pause for a couple of minutes, and I want you to either type your answers into the chat box, or you're going to write the answers into your notebook if you're watching the recorded version. So number 2, what type of data is represented in this graph, categorical or numerical? How do you know? The type of data represented in this particular graph is categorical because the question that would have been asked here is about a category versus a number. It's about an actual category versus a number. What type of dogs are the most popular? Our third question, what do you notice about the scale of this graph, and how does it change the way the data is portrayed? We're going to take just a few minutes, pause, for you to find an answer for that. Type it in the chat box, or if you're watching the recorded version, go on and write it in your math notebook. Okay, so for question number 3, what do you notice about the scale of this graph? How does it change the way the data is portrayed? So the scale, they're referring to the number of pets over here, means the difference between one of these lines to the next. What's the difference between each? So if you look over here, you've got 0 is the first number, and then 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. It keeps going up. So you can tell that the difference, of course, means if you subtract this number minus that number, 3 minus 0, the answer will be 3. If you subtract 6 minus 3, it will be 3. If you subtract 9 minus 6, it will be 3. So the actual scale for this one is 3. And it changes the size of the bars. However, it does not change the proportion between the bars. So the difference between these is going to be the same. The difference is the same here. Next question, why would someone want to use a scale when creating a graph? You would want to use a scale because if we use the numbers over here, if we did 1, we went in order, 1 all the way up to 39, 39 would be too big for this particular graph. So they use a scale in order to make the numbers fit. Our independent work is going to be page number 3 in our binder. Our independent work is page number 3 in our binder. Now what I have done and what most other teachers have done, and they'll let you know, is this has been assigned to you already in Google Classroom. It's been assigned in Google Classroom as a Google form that you can complete. But it's also page number 3 in your notebook. So this is your independent work after we finish here today. And to make sure to submit your assignment after you completed it.